to this computer. And then, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the Media Club again. It's time again to meet up. Welcome. I'm Michael from the American University of Paris, and I'm the user services librarian. And we chose another great book to discuss in the Media Club. It's called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. It's written by Shoshana Zuboff, and she's a emerita at the, I think, Harvard Business School. She has written about digital tools, digital technology, digital media over the last 30 years. She has published a couple of books on the same topic. Myself, preparing for today's Media Club, I watched also a couple of keynotes by Shoshana Zuboff, and she's a fascinating speaker. She's very knowledgeable on the topic. She's touching on economics, sociology, politics. And so her focus right here in this book is about the age of surveillance capitalism, where she's looking actually, and it's a nice link actually to our last session, because we talked about Cambridge Analytica. And in the last session, we focused more on a political aspect of these kind of data harvesting that the big tech companies do today. And she's focusing more on the economic part of the game. And so we're here to discuss the book and to get impressions about the book. It's a very thick book. It's, I think, 600-700 pages, but I think at least 100 pages of notes. And so I'm looking forward to hear from everybody. Maybe as a first round table, maybe any first impressions about the book? Anything you would like to add or like to comment?
Okay, well, I will start because I read this book really, really carefully. And I just want to give you a sense of I made a lot of notes.
Not bad. Yeah, right.
And all through the whole thing. So this book is really highly relevant to my propaganda project.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially the argument is that the just like we're undergoing another kind of revolution, just like when Henry Ford discovered how mass production would change the nature of capitalism by making mass consumption into the mega thing that it is. Zuboff says that we're now entering another big shift in the definition of capitalism, right? And that is the commodification of data, the data exhaust that we throw off with every click, like, and share. I think she makes some really interesting observations about what the tech industry calls that. Sometimes they call it breadcrumbs, right? Sometimes they call it data exhaust, but really it is the new currency of this new kind of capitalism. And so in this book, she considers the implications of turning human behavior into a commodity. I guess that's a good way to start.
I think so too. Frank, you did not read the book, right? You didn't have the chance. It's a very thick book. Frank, I'm going to have to unmute you maybe, I think. I'm going to unmute you maybe.
Yeah, I did not read this book, but the topic is very important and very interesting to me. So I thought it would be worth my while to pay attention to the conversation.
Jesse, any thoughts? Did you have the chance to read the book?
No, I have not read the book. This is my first DigiURI Media Club, and I'm really excited to be here, but I apologize. I've been traveling like a crazy person, so I haven't had a chance to finish it.
The book is my first reaction to it's of course it's a very thick book, but I think I opened the book a couple of times, and wherever you open the book, you always come across these little anecdotes that are very, very interesting. And for example, I came across one anecdote about how Google found out how to make money out of human data, actually. And I think that was very interesting. That was in the year 2000, when they used to use actually all the search terms only to improve the searches. But then suddenly, like I think it was like during a TV show, they saw like that there was kind of a human pattern happening over like a time period. And people would start like searching like first at the East Coast something, and then like in the center of the United States, and then at the West Coast. And suddenly they had like this kind of idea, there we can somehow maybe predict like something by using that data to and to exploit that kind of. And I thought this was something, when you think about like the historical perspective, how they came across like this kind of so it was like an unintended side effect to the whole story. So I thought that was like a little, just opening book, I came across that. So
I love that you shared that example, Michael, because I do think that was a big surprise in the beginning of the book. She basically outlines, and using interviews and very rich data, right? So she's not just reading the newspaper, right? She's using interviews with tech execs and other very, very good quality source material. She basically says Google kind of discovered around 2002 that the search data that people typed in could predict behavior. And then, of course, they recognized how valuable it is from the point of view of the advertiser to have anything that can predict what a consumer will do, in the future. So I think that observation that they didn't intend to create a new economic model, they discovered that the data exhaust that they had been collecting had market value.
And then like another anecdote that I thought that was very, very interesting was also the one about the Pokemon Go. There was like, they then explained like how, for example, Pokemon Go, they used actually like kind of this data of human behaviors then actually to direct people like in certain directions to exploit that kind of human behavior datafication and to take benefit of that. So all these things actually, they come across like in daily life today. And so these were...
Our friend Kristen Hokinson introduced us to Pokemon Go a few years ago, and I remember feeling thrilled and creeped out by it because of the way it gamified moving around in space. And Shoshana Zuboff reframes that service as she reframes for us Google Maps, YouTube, Gmail, Google Apps for Education. She basically says once they discovered that their real product was predicting people's behavior, then they could give away all these products for free, right? So exactly. That it makes sense of sort of why there was this explosion of Google free shit, right? Everything, and the hard push, you guys all remember the very hard way in which we all signed up for Gmail, and we all signed up for YouTube, and we all signed up for Maps, because those free services were actually the engine by which they were going to get more of what the real product was. And I think most of us didn't understand that, and maybe even still we don't understand that. So she also talks a little bit about how the other companies, not just Google, but how Facebook got on to harvesting data in this way. Like, for instance, remember the story about facial recognition, right? Remember, just one day you were using your Facebook and there popped up the name of, Frank Romanelli, there's a picture of him and there's his name, right? Nobody asked permission, right? Nobody asked Frank, is it okay if Facebook labels you? No, they just started doing it, right? And Zuboff has a real issue with that, because she basically says that that's this kind of capitalism's modus operandi. It just takes your data, it takes your stuff, it takes your identity, and then by the time we all figure out what's happening, it's already become normative.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is something very interesting what she was saying also, like in the keynote speech. She was talking about this, actually. She was talking the way how to, because she's seeing that as a problem. So she's saying that these companies make lots of money on the back of this kind of data. And so she was asking actually the question how you could control or how could you fix that situation. And she's saying that basically like that kind of fact that people are just like taking whatever they can, and then that this should be something to limit. And it's not only about like getting a right to get data back, but in the first step that this is actually something to undermine, to stop actually, that people are just taking information.
She does, and she basically blames us a little bit. She says the free services were so seductive that you of course clicked yes to agree to the terms of service. And like guilty as charged, right? We all are, right? We all clicked on the terms of service without reading them, but basically she said that mechanism basically empowered, the fact that people so comfortably did that, empowered all of the tech industries. And it's partly one of the things that frustrates me about this book, which is that it is, and we haven't even gotten to the big implications, but early on when she's talking about terms of service, it's very clear that she doesn't think that congressional legislation is going to solve the problem. And she is aware that by now the public has accepted the value of personalized services, so much so that we really don't want more regulation on these platforms. And so that paradox, she kind of sidesteps. She doesn't sidestep, she just acknowledges that there might not be a solution because of the way in which we have been seduced to love personalized social media.
But in a way, I think there's two things that come into my mind. I think we are so used to it right now. So it would be kind of strange right now to say we would have to pay for that. And so that's like one issue that we really have to address, or like that's something to discuss about. And then the other fact maybe is like, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, we were maybe not aware of that risk. Today we see in the aftermath of like maybe the Cambridge Analytica, we see like the big impact that can have this kind of data harvesting. And so she's really shedding that light on the economic side. So I think this is something really like to, and I have the thing right now, the public consciousness is there's like a big debate right now coming up. We have like, you see everybody's talking, for example, about the platform capitalism. People are talking about the weapons of mass destruction right here, but in the power of algorithms. I remember also like having read like the Time Merchants by Tim Wu, who's also like advocating actually that we should, for good journalism, we should actually pay something for that. It's like in a good restaurant. But at the same time, I don't see that actually happening. I'm not gonna sure how, you see, if I'm gonna use WhatsApp and I'm gonna have to update my WhatsApp, if I would say, okay, if it's free, then I have to give away all my rights that they can access all of my data. And all my friends are on WhatsApp. I'm locked in somehow, otherwise I'm gonna cut off everything. So I was wondering how to, either is there something maybe new coming up? Is there like a development maybe, hopefully in the future, that this is going to be different, or I don't know. These are questions I'm having at the moment.
Those are good questions to have, Michael, and I do appreciate you. One of the things I love about academic librarians, don't we love this, is do you notice how he built our reading list there in that elegant, subtle way, right? There's a network of scholars, and you identified some of the most interesting and important ones in that little riff that you just did. But I'll tell you what I think is the next thing that it has to happen, and that is the public has to deeply recognize that something that's really hard for us to recognize. Media scholars have noticed this for 100 years. We don't like to admit that media influences us, right? It's called the third person effect. We think media influences other people, but we don't think it influences us. But in this book, Shoshana Zuboff does an amazing job explaining the very many different subtle and not so subtle ways that the social media platforms control our behavior, right? And she talks about how in the industry they call this actuation. That's what the industry calls shaping your behavior. And they acknowledge that sometimes it's as simple as a nudge. That's a little set of choices, like a set of choices that are programmed into the platform that encourage you to do something, but not something else. And so I think actually we can start to learn to recognize those nudges, right? When we're being pushed into a certain direction, like the recommendation engines on YouTube that push us to watching more extreme content. But one of the most startling examples of the impact of social media platforms on our behavior was this study that she describes from 2010 in the congressional elections of 2010, where the Facebook ran a randomized controlled experiment on 61 million users, splitting the users into two groups. Some users were shown information about the polling places at the top of their feed, and some of them got information about their friends voting, right? And basically what they proved is that they could influence voter turnout by how they tweaked the algorithm, right? So they could suppress voter turnout, or they could increase voter turnout. And I feel like now that's called emotional contagion, right? Where your friend's behavior is contagious and it influences you. But I feel like knowing that they did that in 2010 makes it kind of perfectly obvious about what happened in 2016 with the Cambridge Analytica and the sort of extreme targeting of people. And so I think once people begin to recognize that the platform has the capacity to shape your behavior without your knowledge, that could activate the psychological phenomenon called reactance. It's the human tendency to get pissed off when you feel like you're being controlled. So, and of course, media literacy sometimes exploits this, right?
I see that, yeah.
So, can media literacy educators inspire people getting pissed off in order to essentially change their behavior? Yeah, that's it, April. That's how you spell it. Reactance. It's the psychological phenomenon. Especially, you notice it among adolescents, don't you, April? Right? They get pissed off when they feel like they're being controlled, and that will cause behavior. That can lead to behavior change. So
I have to think that there's maybe this one people are really getting pissed off, but maybe also like when there's issues of privacy coming up, that this might be also like a very strong motivation actually, like, for people to say that they're getting kind of worried, or saying they don't want to share that, and suddenly they see that this kind of data is taken away, or they're exposed like to something. And I've seen that in my classroom, like the other day, like I think 4 weeks ago, when I talked about screencasts. And so they were like not happy if I asked them if we could share them maybe like also like on YouTube, and they all said no, don't do that. And I was, in a way, I was like going like this, and I was saying, is that a problem? And then I was saying, but I was very happy about my students asking that question, because it was just like when I was watching the documentary The Great Hack about the Cambridge Analytica, and I was very pleased actually to you. So I stopped like the screencast project, I put it aside, and then I start talking about like the privacy issues. And so I thought maybe that might be like, again, like by you talking about anger, like people being pissed off, or like seeing also like the damage that has been done, like let's see Brexit, for example, or whatever. Or like maybe by kind of fear that they might actually react and maybe come up with different solutions. So, but I was wondering if some other people have like some thoughts on like the conversation right here.
I do.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Speak up.
Go ahead, Frank.
No, Jessica, go ahead. You first. I'll mute.
Okay. I had a question about Zuboff. If she has some reflection on the toll that all of these new programs and tools and apps are having on kind of from a sociological perspective, human wellness. Because I started a book recently called How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, which is suggesting to kind of rethink all of it and rethink maybe perhaps spending more time online, offline, face to face with people, and not trying to kind of take it over the system and kind of hack the system, the online system, but really to kind of ground yourself in your place and time, and start to look inward and also within your immediate community, which I find really interesting, and a direct reaction to, it's called How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell. And I found it because it sounds like a very economic kind of deconstruction of what's going on with our data. And I'm wondering if she's talking about human kind of wellness.
She absolutely does. One of the most stunning parts of the book, that where she like turns at the last third of the book, she turns to talk about when she was a young woman at Harvard in the psychology department, and how the big man on campus at that time was B.F. Skinner. Some of you may be old enough to remember B.F. Skinner was kind of like the leading behavioral psychologist. You know, he was the guy who trained pigeons with intermittent reinforcement. And he, late in his life, he wrote a very controversial book that basically said that human freedom is an illusion. And we should just get over it, because really our behavior is controlled by society. And so you really just don't have, well, he sort of said, you'll have human freedom once you admit that you're controlled and controllable. And yeah, and she uses that to suggest something like an idea that's kind of aligned to what you just talked about. This idea that we've become we've been engineered. These tools are engineering us to be part of the herd, to have a herd mentality, right? And this extreme attention to what other people think and what other people look like and what other people feel and what other people are doing is really destructive for real human freedom and dignity. So in a way that connects to your idea about wellness. And I think she does end the book with that argument. So it's very, and it's beautiful. It's lyrically written. It's very compelling. And you really do start to reflect on how the loss of independent autonomy, sort of aloneness, is really a consequential loss to society and to individuals as well.
Well, and she's also, Jenny Odell is asking us to rethink the concept of productivity in this age, right? Like, we're so busy, but are we actually happy? And to really rethink, like I started like kind of counting on my hand how many social media accounts I'm managing. And it's like, for what? Like, actually for what? We're doing these things because we're supposed to. And so I feel like it's a really interesting kind of, I feel like it's a bit of a whistle blow, like in terms of, hold on a sec, let's stop and pause and rethink really why we're doing these things. And especially because of what Zuboff is talking about in terms of actually all of this behavior being monetized. Like, there's that, but there's also our own wellness, I feel.
I think that what you're saying, Jesse, is like, for me, it's like one part of kind of resistance, or like an answer to that kind of overdoing, like, of this data gathering, you see, that people opt out. But I think that's like, it's when you take a sociological perspective, I have to think that's only a part of society. It's in the mainstream. I have to think that it's still very strongly like involved, like in the social media. And because I see that on my side as well, that I'm trying to opt out a little bit. I do read consciously. So that's like one thought from my side. I know that Frankie wanted to ask a question as well. So I'm holding back
Just
a little
that.
bit.
So I'm fascinated by my undergrads all the time on this issue, because it seems like there's a generation gap here in terms of how we value our privacy. And I'm fascinated that even now in 2019, I'm getting the same responses I got from them in 2011 when I had this conversation with them based on Thomas Friedman's writing, The Great Inflection, and and we saw it coming, and I would talk to them about back then. Do you know that gap ad on your Facebook is not an accident? And the response was, "That's good. That's good. It makes it easier for me." And I didn't know what to do with that. I was like flabbergasted. I was like, "No, but don't you understand like privacy and your rights and your freedom?" And they didn't. And even now, like after we had the last conversation about the video about Cambridge Analytica, I went to same class, different students, right, 8 years later, and got the same response. And I'm fascinated by that. And I know we've had this conversation, Renee and some others. Is it the post 9/11, student? Is it, or is it something else, or is it this need to connect has become so addictive? I don't think Carl Jung meant this when he was talking about the collective soul, but it seems like that's kind of what it's become to them. So.
I love that phrase. The need to connect has become addictive. I think that's really insightful. I think that's really insightful, Frank. And I think in a way that idea explains the power of surveillance capitalism, right? Because the new economics of the tech industry is tapping into a very human need to connect. Like, this is survival. From a survival evolutionary point of view, being part of a herd was a good way to stay alive, right?
Sure.
So that's a powerful insight, and reflecting on that is interesting, because here we are gathered as a community, right? We need each other. We're social creatures.
Well, that's like the one, and then of course, like from a sociological perspective, if you look at the identity formation, like the young people, they look like for that other, like the peer, and then like to create like when you look at the writings of Mead, that actually they need like the other to create their identity, and so that's the reason. It could be an explanation why then the young people, they like so much the social media, you see, and for them in a way it's kind of a normality, like something normal, and maybe that's. But that's like something I'm very interested, because like the Skinner argument that you bring up, Renee, is very interesting, because you have like that frame, or like this context where you come out, you see, and this frames you like, and then, but you still always have then the liberty like to do whatever or the freedom to do whatever you want to. So, but it seems like that's, when I listen then to Frank, that the students, they continue actually like to do the same thing, right? I understood that correctly. So, and even like looking like at the Cambridge Analytica scandal, they might then still not change anything. But then,
and the paradox about what I said is that they also agree with what you said. They don't want to be seen or heard on the internet. They don't want to publish. They don't want. They're afraid of that, and yet it's almost like if I can't see it happening, it's okay. This kind of like voluntary ignorance. To that this is happening to and that fascinates me too.
Yeah, I feel like I think she's counting on the idea that the pendulum swings, and when people recognize that their natural need to be socially connected is being exploited, they get angry and reject that. And so she uses, at the very end of the book, she uses George Orwell to sort of explain how certain events in history can like trigger a reaction where people get angry and say, fuck this, enough of this, and then move away from that paradigm. So she acknowledges that it's going to take a social movement. In a way, that's partly explains the tone of the book. It's several times, Michael, I don't know if you experienced this, or Sam, when you were reading the book, but at some points her language is very high flown and passionate and like an old school socialist kind of grabbing you by the throat and like, yeah, and annoying. And for 600 pages or whatever it is, you know, it's
I know, I
annoying.
know. But I agree with you. It's like very socialist. But you see, it reminds me of our discussion we had last time, you see. Because remember, like when we were saying, I was saying these Facebook and Google, we just have to destroy them, take them apart. It was really like a very like leftist argument, you see, and very anti-capitalistic. And I remember like your answer, you're saying we have to work with them in a way to make in a way, because the question is how to control that, you see. How can we actually get our hand on the whole situation to avoid like situations like of Brexit, you see. Or like any kind of influence on the vote, you see, like all this kind of massive propaganda. So I forgot right now what I wanted to say. So for me, yeah, like this was really like the big question, like together with them to control them, or like really like to this leftist, like saying we go against them, you see. And I agree with you that she's very leftish.
Antonio, Sam, what are your thoughts about this crazy book?
I'm gonna unmute everybody. Any thoughts, Antonio or Sam?
Hi.
Hello.
I believe that we need to speak about the surveillance, about the commodification, about the monetization, about the propaganda in the school. Like say David Buckingham, he's my preferred author. Side about the history of media, and we need to ask questions about the media.
Thank you. I think it's really good to bring back this idea about the challenges of propaganda. So part of what made the book so interesting to me is the way in which she got these tech developers to like talk so honestly about their mechanisms of social control. So in the chat, I just put one of the quotes, right, from the book where a software developer basically in the interview with Zuboff, she interviewed hundreds of people for this book. It took her like 10 years to write it, right? He said, we are learning how to write the music and then we let the music make them dance, right? So their ideas about using the power of communication as a means of social control is really, that's at the heart of propaganda, right? And the idea that these platforms themselves are created in ways that control behavior. I feel like you're right, Frank, maybe you're right. Maybe kids really don't care about that. But I do actually think there's a wake up possibility. For some, it's going to be stepping away from the stress of it, like what Jesse talked about, kind of like making your life more humane by unplugging. For some of us, it's going to be about moving in the policy arena around breaking up the big monopoly, right? Which is, of course, one way forward in terms of figuring out how to regulate the industry. But one of the things that's kind of frustrating about the book is that her solution is we need a social movement, right? And of course, I'm all for that. Media literacy is a social movement. I think media literacy educators could be part of this movement, but she doesn't identify like political elements of the platform. Like, do we need to break up big tech? Do we need to give people more power over how their data is used, right? So she doesn't give us a crisp set of action points, right? And I wish for that, because I think it would make it easier to.
Well, you know, any revolution is a result of crisis, though, and we're not at. I don't think people realize or think we're at a crisis point right now. The convenience outweighs, you know, the disadvantages, and you know, people. I put a link over there from Kashmir Hill. I listened to her talk on NPR one day about how she tried to unplug, and it was just impossible to live in this world unplugged. It just was not an option. And that was fascinating to me. And how do we make it an option? You're right. It would have to be a revolution, but I would have to be hungry to want to revolt for that idea and we're not, you know.
Great point. Great point. Sam, what are your thoughts about this crazy book? What do you like about it? What do you hate about it? How do you weigh in on it?
Oh my goodness. First of all, sorry for being late. I literally just got in from Charlotte. So this book was infuriating for me, just because, well, I think about like my niece who I just spent the whole weekend with, and she's 11 and she's on TikTok constantly. And I talked to her about like, oh, so when you got a TikTok account, like what kind of information did you have to give to start your account? And she's like, oh, I don't know, I guess like my name or whatever. And trying to shine some lights on some of these issues around, you know, generating an account for an 11-year-old and what kind of information that gives TikTok access to. None of that registered to her at all. And even in the class that I'm teaching, this undergrad class, one of the students actually chose data privacy to speak about for 7 minutes in front of the class. And afterward, I asked him and the class, like, okay, now that you understand data privacy a little bit better and some of the legal efforts to try and, you know, protect our privacy, what do you guys think? Will you do anything differently? And they all said no. And so I wonder, you know, of course we do need a social movement, and the book I think did a really beautiful job showing why that is and how human behavior and social control, you know, are heavily influenced, and we're kind of in danger from that. But I wonder, you know, to all of us who grew into this technology and we are able to kind of wrap our heads around its evolution, I think in a different way, are we the last stronghold? Young people who are coming up, who were born into this is all they know, this is how they function. They don't even understand the convenience aspect because it's just reality. For us, it's a convenience because we know having to mail a paper letter, right? They don't really have that comparison. So the appreciation for the evolution of what this data trade-off is doing, I just don't think is going to hit home the same way. So, or I'm concerned that it won't. So I wonder if you guys have thoughts about that, or if you've already talked about it.
Well, I like Frank's point about like the peasants aren't going to rise up unless they're starving, and so that's the problem, right? Is that we're very well fed, right? We're very, very well fed. This the thrill and the ease and convenience is really seductive. So,
but are we, Renee? I would like to suggest that there's an increased fear or feeling of isolation and social anxiety that is not actually attributed to social media at all. And I think that's where media literacy education can really come in and help talk to youth specifically about maybe you're feeling these things. Let's talk about social media. You think you're connecting. You're actually, like with television, studies show that when you turn on television, you feel worse about yourself than when you had it on in the first place, when you had it off. So we need to be, I think, educating youth about that direct connection between social anxiety and social media.
That's a great observation. Social anxiety and social isolation are part of, and that's, in a way, media literacy is kind of always acknowledged that while there are these benefits, there are some real harms. And the idea of really carefully identifying, labeling, naming, recognizing, owning those harms is a really powerful, can create a really powerful learning experience for young people.
Well, and Instagram just took off the feature for showing how many likes you have on each post, directly related to this.
Right.
Right. That is one small attempt that is showing that they are taking some responsibility for the way people are internalizing external validation.
Right. But see, there's an interesting paradox there, and Zuboff describes it. She says, so the tech platforms acknowledge, yes, we might be causing harm, but we'll fix it. We'll fix it. Mm-hmm. And so they basically say, just give us time, and as we recognize these problems, we'll fix them. And by and large, we accept that. Mm-hmm. We accept that premise.
Can I add something to that? So I think that's great, and I think it's great that they're thinking of these different solutions, right? Like turning off your likes. But doesn't that kind of go against our social and our like psychological nature? Like we're addicted to these platforms because of things like that feature. So I wonder how likely it is that people are going to even appreciate it or use it in the same way, or even how likely are they to actually turn off the like feature, right?
It's not an option. Canada, we did it. They rolled it out in Canada first. So we've had it for 6 months or something. And to be honest, I'm engaging with it just as much as I was before.
Interesting.
Jesse, you mentioned Canada also made me think earlier. I was thinking about this. One of the other challenges here is, Renee, earlier you had talked about regulation. This has become the globalization of all of this has made regulations something of a different kind of topic too. That's not something that's really feasible at this point.
It's a great point. Certainly, it is possible to regulate the tech companies, but it's possible to do that only in certain geographic areas. So where Michael lives, the GDPR is a type of regulation that intends to make consumers more aware of how their behavior is tracked through cookies online. And every time they go to a website, they have to say they understand that. So that's a form of regulation that has affected a lot of the world, even though it was developed by the European Union. I'm not sure how regulation's going to play out. I think that issue of China and the social credit system. So Zuboff really worries that the commodification of the user behavior. So in her true, like it is written like it's an economics book, right? She understands that the logical development of this is for people to get a score based on their social value as determined by their online behavior. And she understands that that's the ultimate form of social control, right? Where you could be denied things. You could be denied things by depending on your online behavior. So how to regulate that? I don't know.
For me, this is almost, thank you for bringing it up, like the regulation aspect or the question of that, because I agree that this is almost impossible, you see. I don't see how that question of regulation can happen, you see. Or like, yeah, this is something.
It could be, the duopoly could be broken up. So historically, the only legal mechanism we have in the United States is antitrust, right? And so, and I think it's complicated to think about how an antitrust effort could break up the power of big tech. But she does explain in the book how that's how they've gotten to be so powerful, is that any good idea that comes along in the tech world, they absorb it, right? So they've basically bought their competition. So they've basically swallowed up the whole Silicon Valley enterprise.
Because that's the thing, you see, like it started like with Google, then it jumped over to Facebook, then it jumped over to Microsoft, then it jumped over to all like the network companies in the United States. And today, I think everybody is doing that kind of data harvesting. So regulations, if you're going to bring it in like in the United States or like doing antitrust, so somebody else is going to pop up maybe in China or like in Germany and it's going to do the same thing. GDPR, like on the individual level, I'm not sure if it does anything, you see, because you can claim to get your data back, but it's going to take like 5 years that you're going to get your data back, you see, and you have to go to law and everything. So when I go to Washington Post today, like on Europe, and I click on the thing, I'm going to have to agree that I'm going to get the free version. I'm going to agree that third parties can use my data. And so do my habits change right now from today? No, they do not too much, you see. So in a way, I don't know. So these are just like some thoughts to the
That's a great point, Michael. So maybe law cannot solve this problem. You know, speaking of your identity as a librarian, I think one of the things I learned from librarians over the last couple of years is that there's like, librarians really help us understand the essential tension between using data for personalizing services and protecting people's privacy. So librarians collect a lot of data, or could collect a lot of data on user behavior, but they choose not to as a matter of policy. right? So they philosophically say, whatever you do at our library, whatever books you check out, whatever CDs you listen to, whatever you do in our library, we are not going to pay attention.
We don't want to know. We just say we don't want to know. So, but you
and
see,
they do that as a matter of protecting intellectual freedom. Right? That's the underlying reason, right?
Exactly. And then the big point was like after the 9/11 attacks, this was turned over like by Bush and was really on the hard attack. And it was really like saying, we want to know what people are checking out because we want to know what they are reading. We want to know. So really like, and there was like a huge conflict between the library community or librarian community and then the Bush administration in the wake. So, yeah, so librarians are really concerned about this privacy issue.
In some ways, the courage of the librarians in standing up to that bullshit that's a story that most people don't know about.
Yeah, maybe.
Right? And it's a story that's kind of
it wasn't me. I didn't stand up to Bush.
It's a story that I think, if more broadly appreciated and understood, could illustrate the tension, right? Because between these two different paradigms. On the one hand, Google is much better at offering me just what I want. They're like the best librarian in the world, right? Because even before I type in the keyword, they know what I'm likely to click on next, right?
They frame us.
In a way, they've used data to improve service, and that makes them a very good librarian. On the other hand, they don't respect my intellectual freedom because they sell my data, right? They use my data to control me. So I wonder if that story, the story of librarians resisting, could be a relevant story to this current age.
It would be nice, but I think the role of the librarians is somehow, we're not in the center. We don't get in the center of the debate. Somehow, I have the feeling. We are not in the classroom many times, you see. So it's like the students, when they look for help, they're going to go see the faculty member. So in a way, the librarians are not very strong on that, actually, like on this kind of outreach part. And that's my feeling, you see, especially like also like in Europe, where information literacy is not like something that is taught by everybody, like the faculty librarian does not really exist, like in the United States. It's really like it's a hard battle, you see. So the role right here. So we have to fight for that. So it's gonna be. I do that every day. So I'm gonna go for coffee. I'm gonna go there. But I have another question, and I think that's because we've heard like so many things right now, but I was wondering actually, so is there anything missing in that book? Because she's doing a very good analysis of capitalism. She's doing I'm not an expert in economics. She's saying there's like the history of capitalism, it's evolving like in that kind of direction. She's saying there's something new. But then I'm asking myself, is she somehow overseeing things? You see, is there something, I don't know. I don't know. That was like another, maybe that's like.
What's missing? That's always a good question, Michael. What's missing? I was happy to see that she did address how the cultural attitudes about spycraft are part of why we accept being spied upon. Right. So she does kind of relatively early in the book talks about how Google and the National Security Agency, which is like our big data collecting branch of our federal government that records every phone call. Right. Yeah. She does talk about how Google collaborated with the CIA and the NSA to basically coordinate their data collection services. And I feel like I wondered as I read that part of the book, like, are there political nuances around, now some people have called it the deep state, right? the surveillance agencies that are baked into our political system. She doesn't talk much about that beyond just page 116, 117. She just briefly touches on that. But I thought I would like to read another book that helps me understand better about how our government surveillance systems operate. I feel like what I've learned about that, I've learned from like watching The Good Wife and Law and Order. Right? What the hell?
Yeah, it reminds me. A friend talked to me about a book called "The Permanent Record" by Edward Snowden that just came out, and could be something interesting. Of course, it's going to be a political book. So
Thanks for that suggestion. What's it called? The Permanent Record?
The Permanent Record. Apparently, it came out in September, and then you see, it also made me think like when I thought about like the history of capitalism and how things evolve. It's there's like a book in France that that was published in September. It's called like I think Capitalism and Ideology by Thomas Piketty. So who's actually also like going like in the direction of capital. But yeah, again, reading those books of 1,000 pages about capital, so it's for librarians sometimes. Piketty, I think. Piketty. Capitalism et Ideologie.
So the reason I threw Pinker in the notes is because he talks about independent knowledge versus common knowledge, and the fact that I know something, you know something, but when I know you know, and I know you know I know, and he goes into that whole thing. And that's when media literacy comes in, I think, and the importance of education to let everyone know that I know that you know, and we like, and then something can be done. That's really that can start a revolution, maybe as well or better than the hunger.
Yep. I think you're right about that, Frank. And as we come to a close, I think that one of the things that media literacy educators know how to do is to create awareness, right? And we may not be able to figure this out, what the solutions are, right? We may not be able to figure out the policy stuff. That's really not the strength of media literacy, but we are really good at designing learning experiences that facilitate awareness. And so we might spend the last few minutes talking about what different strategies have you used to help students become more aware of how their data exhaust or their data breadcrumbs are being used? Like, what have you tried, or what part of this have you explored with students, and how do you bring it up?
Anybody wants to go first? No.
Well, I like to, I work with students age 6 and up. And we can start talking about what kind of information they're giving, especially with account creation early on, before they even make the account. But then getting into secondary, we can start talking about looking for work and just doing basic Google searches on themselves. And so understanding the awareness between public and private accounts. And also conversely searching the employers that they may want to get a job with as well, because they're going to be searched, so they might as well search the people that they're trying to work for.
Nice.
So starting simple, right? But just trying to kind of open their minds out a little bit. I mean, we all know that adolescents are often very self-centered and not totally aware at all of the reach that they have. Like some of my cousins even that are really young, like their accounts are public, and it shocks me. It's like, oh my God, like how, I don't think they've ever been taught. I don't think it's never even occurred to them that this isn't cool for anyone above 18, you know, and they are going to want to work in the world as an adult.
Right.
And
I love those examples, because those examples really start with the me, right? Start to understand your own, how you are represented, how you choose to represent yourself, and how the world seems to understand you, and especially in relation to stuff like employment. One thing that I do with my students is I do this activity where I ask them, we talk about how my general phrase is, you know, your Netflix is not my Netflix, and your Google is not my Google. Right? And your Amazon is not my Amazon. And I show them my choices. When I go to Netflix, I'm presented with these things, which they're all like, what are cultural documentaries? They don't even recognize the labels, right? Critically acclaimed international, like that does not come up on their Netflix, right? So I say, notice that Netflix does not show me anime. It does not show me action adventure. It does not show me cartoon superhero movies. I wouldn't know how to find them because Netflix knows I don't like those things. So then I ask them we do an experiment, which is, I say, log into your not URI Google account and type on one day on the same day, tonight after school, type in the phrase Germany and then see what results, and take a screenshot of the first 10 hits, the first search engine results page, and then post it on this digital bulletin board on a Padlet wall. And then we look at the similarities and differences between every kid's search engine page of results. And it's absolutely clear that some kids are getting Al Jazeera and RT as their source of information about Germany. And some kids are getting the New York Times and the Washington Post. And some kids are getting BuzzFeed and Vice, right? And so we start to realize the aha is like, oh, we all typed in Germany on the same day in the same engine, but 2/3 of our results are different because of the data that we've already provided about our interests and preferences. And so then we have a discussion about, like, so what does it matter, right? And so what does it matter that we get different information about Germany, right? So what does it matter that we don't all get the same news about Germany? And what are the good things about that? And what are the bad things about that? And it ends up being a really good discussion because, like, they had the aha just by looking at the results pages.
You got same activity, Renee. I love that. And I also have them do the activity was mentioned. I think Jesse mentioned it earlier about doing a Google search of yourself. But then I have them side by side do a DuckDuckGo search of themselves, and identify the differences between the two searches. And then that leads to that discussion as well.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
I have a burning addition really quickly. So it's great that, like, it's awesome that we have all of these tools and digital platforms and softwares and things to share with our students as we encourage them to be more digital literate. But really the only thing that I've been doing to this end is I've stopped saying it's a free program. I say it does not cost you money, but remember that if you choose to use this tool, it will collect data about you and you should use the privacy rights. So that's I think a big one.
Love that. I love that. Simple change in the way we describe these tools.
Great insight. You threw that into my class last week and that changed everything for me. I will say that every time now. Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah. I like the fact also that they should really, like, consciously choose, like, the privacy policies. And that's something really, like, or like really, like, try to dig down, like, the rabbit hole, like, who's the third party. And I've not taught it so far, but I would actually create it in that manner. So they would actually look at data privacy. They would have to click on things. I would ask them maybe about what data they are willing to give away.
Yeah.
Stuff like this, that they really take where are the limits, you see. And then maybe see also that some other people might not give away as much information as that's would be, but I haven't actually taught it so far, so.
Yeah, I did it with the teachers at the Summer Institute last summer, Michael.
I missed it. Oh, don't tell me about it.
I showed them my Google page, and then I said, let's see who's tracking, let's see who the third parties are who are buying my data. And you can see it on Google, right? And I showed them click, 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 and it was like 150 companies were buying my ad data. And with one click, I turned them all off. Click.
Ooh.
And so it was like very satisfying feeling to demonstrate that we can take control of these platforms. That's the thing, the optimistic thing, right? There are mechanisms, and I think we can pressure these companies to give us more mechanisms like that. So anyway, that's part of the solution. All right, thank you for joining us. What a fun day, Michael.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. So that was.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. That was great. I think we can still continue reading this big book, I guess. No way. It's going to be.
So we're off for January, right?
We're off for January. Maybe, Sam, you want to take the link for next time we're going to meet in?
So next time should be, I think, February 2nd.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At 9 a.m. Eastern, and we'll start voting now. There's already 3 new selections up on the voting form, so it's bit.ly/DigiURI vote.
Frank, who is this person in the back of you? There's an invader.
Panda,
So I think that's one of the coolest things about this program is that you users actually get to determine what the topics are. So I'll look forward to your email that gives us the link to vote, Sam. Have a happy holiday, you guys, and we'll see you in February.
Thank you, everybody. That was great. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bisous, bisous. Here we go.